Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. This book tells in detail about the Muslim conquest of Spain under the Umayyad Caliphate from 711 AD to 718 AD. The conquest is also known as the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula or the Umayyad conquest of the Visigothic kingdom. This conquest destroyed the Visigothic kingdom and established the Umayyad wilaya of Al-Andalus. It also resulted in the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Muslim rule into Europe. Start of Chapter 5. The Move to Battle. Roderick had no doubts about where the invading force had come from. He did not for a moment believe that it had fallen from heaven or sprung from the earth. Africa was the only place it could come from, and the Gothic king rightly guessed that Count Julian was behind the operation. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Roderick was distressed by the intelligence conveyed by Count Theodomir. Here was an enemy knocking at his back door, an enemy unknown and potentially more dangerous, while he was engaged frontally by other enemies in the Basque country. He took the right decision. He would disengage with his northern foes and let them wait until he had dealt with the southern ones. He would return later to settle accounts with the Basques and the Franks. Having broken contact with his unruly northern subjects, the king marched south with an army whose strength has been exaggerated by reports to 100,000. He made for Cordoba, but in order to stop the invaders from acquiring more territory and spreading alarm and despondency among his subjects, he sent a large cavalry detachment to deal with them. This body of horsemen moved with all speed to Cordoba under a nephew of the king named Pencio. From Cordoba, Pencio continued his southward move to contact the invaders, on the way picking up scattered elements of Theodomir's force which had tried unsuccessfully to contain Tariq at Cartea. It is believed that Count Theodomir also joined this detachment, which has been described as the flower of the Gothic cavalry. Meanwhile, Muslim columns were riding far and wide, intimidating the local population and gathering food and fodder. They were to live off the land and were doing it very well. The frightened natives let the Muslims have their way, which is just what the Muslims wanted. They raided deep into the districts of Algeciras and Sidonia, and while Muslim foraging parties were out bringing in cattle and sheep, Julian's agents were out bringing in information about Gothic reactions. The first contact between the Muslims and the Gothic cavalry took place in the district of Sidonia. The Muslims fell back towards Algeciras. Pencio came on and engaged the Muslims, dividing his cavalry group into several squadrons. A series of bloody clashes followed, in all of which the Muslims got the better of their enemies. Pencio was killed in one of these clashes, as well as another officer named Enekon or Edico. Theodomir got away and was to live to fight another day. After a few days of confused fighting, the Gothic cavalry was driven off and withdrew northwards, but not before losing a large number of horses and men. The horses were a welcome addition to Muslim strength and mobility because they had come with few. As the Goths scattered, they were pursued by the Muslims for several days. One report says that the Muslims went after them as far as Cordoba, but this is probably an exaggeration. Tariq now resumed his raids with even greater vigor, achieving even greater success. The Muslims dominated the countryside in this southern corner of Spain. Tariq also shifted his base. He moved from Algeciras along the coastal route and established a new base at Tarifa. He was not yet informed of Roderick's move from Pamplona and was considering an attack on Cordoba, which after Toledo was the most important city in Spain. He moved to Tarifa in order to place the Muslims nearer this objective while maintaining direct and close communication with North Africa. However, before Tariq could seriously undertake the venture against Cordoba, he was given the alarming news that 100,000 Goths were marching against him. It was now the month of Shaban 92 Hijri, May or June 711. King Roderick marched from Cordoba. He had to worry not only about the invaders, but also about his own kind. The sons of the late King Witiza were far from reconciled to his assumption of power. They felt that they had a better right to the throne than Roderick, and this feeling was shared by a sizable body of dissidents who threw in their lot with Witiza's sons, Olmondo and Ardabasto. The princes were in Galicia, where they had under their command a considerable element of the Gothic army. Roderick wrote to the princes. He called upon them to join him so that they could put up a united front against the common enemy, and warned them against harboring private feuds which would create disunity and weaken their resolve. Roderick wrote also to the governors of several provinces and summoned them to Cordoba with the forces at their disposal. Contingents came in from the provinces. So did the stragglers from the cavalry detachment of the late Bencio. So did the sons of Witiza with their military followers, who apparently were sufficient in number to form two divisions of the army. But the princes did not trust Roderick. They were not going to put themselves at his mercy. They camped at Secunda, south of the river Guadalquivir, on the opposite bank from the city of Cordoba, and waited here until it was time to go. When Roderick came out of the city with the bulk of his army to march south, they joined the army. The disaffection of the princes encouraged a similar sentiment in a large number of Gothic nobles. They were a minority, but not an insignificant one. These Gothic chiefs talked amongst themselves about the coming of the Muslims as a God-sent opportunity to overthrow Roderick and be rid of him. They did not regard the Muslims as a serious threat to the realm, and this is what they said to one another. This wretch has taken possession of our throne. He is not from the family of kings, but is only one of our followers. We are not going to let ourselves be destroyed by madness and strife caused by his actions. As for these people who have come, they have no need to settle in our land. All they want is to fill their hands with plunder, and then they will go back. So when we meet the enemy, let us be defeated along with this son of a wicked woman. Perhaps they will hand power to us, and when they have gone, we will place on the throne one who is deserving of it. At Tarifa, Tariq heard of the advance of the Gothic army of 100,000 men. Now there was no question of continuing an offensive into the country. The Muslims would hardly be able to hold on to the coast of Spain against such odds, but the invasion had to go on. Tariq was not the man to go in like a lion and come out like a mouse. Consequently, he wrote to Musa bin Nusayr, informing him of the march of Roderick and the reported strength of Roderick's army. He explained that he was not able with his present strength to stand up to such a vast army, and he asked for help. The response of Musa to this request for help is not easy to understand. Knowing the enemy's strength, one would expect that he would move in person with the rest of the army and take command in Spain. He had 18,000 Arab troops with him, in addition to 5,000 Berber warriors who had been part of Tariq's command at Tangier. Musa had wisely had a large number of boats constructed at Ceuta, so that he would not depend for communication between the two continents on the slender thread of Julian's 4 vessels. But he did not go in person to Spain, nor did he send the bulk of the army to engage in a decisive battle against the Gothic power. He just sent 5,000 Berbers across the strait to reinforce Tariq. This contingent moved under Tarif, the Berber chief who had led the first Muslim raid into Spain during the preceding year and given the name of Tarifa to the place where he landed. Musa was too sound a strategist to err in a matter of such magnitude. He was not the man to make silly mistakes or to avoid battle. He probably intended to let Tariq engage with Goths with his own Berber army. He was not likely to win against such odds, but the Goths, even in winning a victory, would suffer such terrible damage at the hands of the fierce Berbers that they would not be in a fit state to fight another battle for some time to come. Musa would then cross over with his larger army, bring the Goths to battle before they could recover, and inflict a crushing defeat upon them. It was a clever if ungenerous strategy. Musa, the Muslim, would not have done it, but Musa the Arab did. He knew his Berbers, and he knew Tariq. So the Berbers under Tarif crossed the strait and joined Tariq, bringing his strength to 12,000 men. It was an almost entirely Berber army with a few Arabs and a few Negro troops in it. To this Berber army was due the greatest glory in the conquest of Spain. Yet they came not as Berbers, but as Muslims, devout and fearless holy warriors out to conquer the world for Islam. Tariq himself now acted as a devout and fearless holy warrior. Once his Berber reinforcements had landed on the shores of Spain, he had all the boats set on fire. The newly built ships of Musa bin Nusayr as well as the 4 old ferry boats of Count Julian went up in flames. There would be no going back from Spain. Historians have not said exactly where and exactly when Tariq burnt his boats. It could not have been at Gibraltar where he landed because he did not then face any great threat, and there was nothing desperate about the situation. It could have been at Algeciras, and it is possible that the reinforcement joined him at Algeciras, whither Tariq had moved from Gibraltar before going on to Tarifa. It is more likely, however, to have been at Tarifa, where he stayed a while before moving inland. We know from Ibn Khaldun that Tarif landed at Tarifa with a large force, not during his earlier raid but as part of the main invasion. Regardless of where and when he burnt his boats, this was an act of glorious heroism, which has brightened the pages of history for 13 centuries. It was Tariq's challenge to fate, a gesture of total devotion and gallantry, which was to act as a beacon for brave men of all ages and all races. It would become axiomatic in all languages of the human race, a byword for desperate courage, a signal of unflinching dedication to the cause and readiness to die for that cause. Whenever strong men faced other strong men to mortal combat, with boats behind them, burnt or unburnt, many heroes would henceforth, knowingly or unknowingly, follow Tariq's example and destroy all possibility of retreat in the face of the enemy. But the first man to burn his boats was Tariq bin Ziyad, the Muslim holy warrior. Iqbal, the poet of the East, has fancifully but not illogically put into the mouth of Tariq the words, "Every land is our land, because it is the property of our Lord." Some later historians have cast uncharitable aspersions on this act of heroism. Some have said that it probably never happened. Others have added disparagingly that there were only 4 boats. And what are 4 boats? We have the evidence of several historians that the event did take place. Not every historian need relate an event before he accept it as a historical fact. As for the number of boats, it is known that Musa had many constructed after the first passage of the Muslims to Gibraltar. So there were many boats for Tariq to destroy in his fanatical zeal for victory or martyrdom. And if there were only 4, it should not be forgotten that if 4 vessels were sufficient to transport 12,000 men to the coast of Spain, they were sufficient to take them back to the coast of North Africa. The actual number of boats is not relevant. Tariq destroyed his entire. Having reduced his transport fleet to ashes, Tariq struck camp and marched in the direction of Medina Sidonia. At first he advanced along the coast, then turned inland, and after moving 5 miles stopped at the pass of Fasinas. Here the hilly coastal region gave place to open country which formed the basin of the river Berbat. The pass of Fasinas was ideal for defense, restricting maneuver and nullifying the advantage of superior members. Here the Muslims pitched their tents, taking full advantage of the hilly terrain. Tariq's light troops fanned out in the open country to the north and northwest, covering the approaches from Medina Sidonia, while his scouts waited for a contact with the advancing Goths. Julian's agents probed deeper to discover the intentions and movements of King Roderic's forces. It was now about the very end of June 711, early Ramazan 92 Hijri. The coastal zone west of El Jaquiras up to Cadiz is hilly. North of this coastal zone lies the district of Medina Sidonia, a large fertile plain watered by several rivers, the largest of which is the Rio River Barbate. This river, fed by a number of tributaries, creates in the southern part of the plain a region of lakes and marshes into which some other rivers also flow. The Barbate itself becomes the main drainage channel in these marshes and empties its waters into the Atlantic by the town of Barbate de Franco. The largest part of these marshes comprises the extensive lagoon of Janda, through which the Barbate picks its slow and muddy course. To the west, separating it from the sea, is the Sierra de Retin. To the east, its boundary is marked by several hill ranges. The Barbate flows around the Sierra de Retin to Vejer de la Frontera, then bends back to Barbate de Franco. At the present time, the flow and floods of the Barbate have been controlled by a system of dams and canals, so that much of the marshy area has been drained and the land reclaimed for farming. But at the time of this history, most of the flat area lying south of Benaloup de Sidonia, north of the Sierra de Retin and west of the hills, comprising the Sierra Momia and the Sierra Blanquilla, was one great marsh separated by only narrow strips of land from the foothills to its south and east. This whole marshy area was the lagoon of Janda. The river Barbate itself, unlike its present condition, had swampy borders along its banks. A little farther to the southwest from Cape Trafalgar rise the heights of Mecca, a triangle-shaped range which overlooks the Barbate as it flows into the sea. The hills are named after an ancient town believed to have ceased to exist before the arrival of the Muslims, but which, according to local inhabitants, may have been Vejar de la Frontera, also an ancient town on the banks of the Barbate. The Arabs rendered this Mecca or Becca or Bakka, which is also the name which the Arabs called Vejer de la Frontera. Bakka was later also called Laka. The Muslims gave the name of the hills to the river which flowed beneath them and called it Wadi Bakka or Wadi Laka. This was transmitted to Spanish as Guadabeca and Guadaleca. Later Spanish writers, perhaps not knowing the connection between the heights of Mecca and the river, confused the Arabic name of the river with Guadalete, which flows into the Atlantic by Cadiz 30 miles farther to the west. Because of this, the battle which was fought here has been wrongly named in some history books as the Battle of Guadalete. It was the Battle of the Rio Barbate, named by the Muslims as Wadi Bakka and Wadi Laka. The next move was by Roderick. He did not wait for the concentration of all the Christian warriors of Spain. Moreover, because he was in a hurry to meet the invaders, he left most of his infantry behind and set off from Cordoba with his cavalry, which itself amounted to a considerable army. With him marched the elements commanded by the sons of Witeza. The army went past the ancient town of Medina Sidonia and advanced deeper into the plain of the river Barbate. It arrived near the town of Casas Viejas, now Benaloup de Sidonia, and by the bank of the river pitched its tents. Roderick would wait here until he knew more about the location, strength, and intentions of the Muslims. Tariq was immediately informed of the arrival of the Goths by his scouts, who also gave him a description of the ground in the area where the Goths were camped. Then he moved forward. He took the road which ran along the foothills in the direction of Casas Viejas. A few miles short of that town, he crossed the river Kelemin and went into camp facing west, with the Kelamin on his left and the foothills of the Sierra Momia on his right. Farther to his left began the marshes of the lagoon of Janda. Upon the arrival of the Muslims in their camp, Roderick also took a step forward. He crossed the Barbate and established his camp on the east bank of the river. The two armies were now within sight of each other. The next move would be into battle. This confrontation took place in mid-July. The critical student of war might wonder why Tariq moved at all to this location, giving up the security of the hills and nearness to the coast and coming into relatively open country. The observation is entirely valid. With his predominantly infantry force faced by a predominantly cavalry army, many times more numerous, it would have been safer for Tariq to remain at the pass of Fasinas. There he could beat off Gothic attacks with a greater assurance of success and survival. This would have been more sensible, but Tariq was not here as a sensible general worrying about defense and survival. He was here as a conqueror, seeking not to avoid battle but to force it, to defeat the enemies of Allah and go on to conquer the whole of Spain for Islam. Hence the burning of the boats and the forward move. The only event which remains to describe before battle was the attempt by Roderick to find out more about the Muslims. He instructed one of his officers, a brave and true knight, to go into the Muslim camp, carry out a reconnaissance and assess the enemy's strength and condition. This Gothic officer did as he had been ordered. According to some accounts, he was spotted by the Muslims as he was observing their camp from a vantage point and was promptly chased away. According to others, the Muslims let him into the camp to see whatever he wished to see. In fact, Tariq treated him as an honored guest and made him stay for dinner. He does appear to have discovered more about the Muslims than could have been seen from a vantage point outside the camp. He returned to make his report to the king. A people have come to you as was revealed in the casket. The reference here is to the picture seen by Roderick in the enchanted house at Toledo, and the words have probably been added by writers who believe in the legend. The knight continued, "Beware of them. Among them are those who seek nothing but death, or to conquer what lies under your feet. They have burned their boats, so that none may think of saving himself by their means. They have strengthened themselves by the knowledge that there is no place in our land for them to flee." The report of the knight did nothing to reassure King Roderick or calm his fears. End of chapter 5.